This is Coda Radio, episode 190 for February 1st, 2016. Everyone, and welcome to Coda Radio, Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly talk show, taking a pragmatic look at the art and business of software development and related technologies. This episode's brought to you by our two fine sponsors, DigitalOcean and Linux Academy. I'll tell you more about those great sponsors as this your show goes on. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our excellent, established, East Coast-like host, who is avoiding the West Coast. Why, yes, folks, it's Mr. Michael Dominic. Hello there, Michael.
West Coast, worst coast.
Yeah, says you. I tell you what, I challenge you to take a visit to the Pacific Northwest one of these times and just see what I'm talking about. Just take Linux Fest is coming up. Consider it. Just consider it. It's beautiful out here, and there's nice areas you could go hide in that are extremely high energy, freaking out about every little detail. New York Minute style places too that you'd be very happy at.
You know, the thing I like about New York is you can just hide in plain sight, right? Because no one knows who you are. You're just another random, kind of short, squirrely looking dude. And the fact that you're not talking to yourself about the end being nigh is a feature.
Well, there is, that is a little harder to do where I have myself living, but I would say you could go to Seattle. You get that experience. Mr. Dominic, you sound tense this week. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's a tiring day. I'm cogitating.
What is that? What is cogitating?
Cogitating means considering or thinking.
Oh, I like that. You see, you're cog as in cognition. I see.
Yes.
Good.
There's a lot of I'll put it into terms a good Unix man can understand. There are threads. And they are running. These processes may or may not be linking the system and crashing it.
Yeah.
But yes, there are threads and they are running. And they all of them, avoid the West Coast.
Well, can I close a thread from the West Coast? Just to circle back, I mentioned during the pre-show, but while I was at Scale last 2 weeks ago? Jeez. I feel like I've just gotten back because, when you get back from a trip, there's so much work stuff to get caught up on that is a lost week. And so I feel like this is my first week back from Scale, even though it's actually my second week back. And I got a few people there repping the Coda Radio. So they'd love to see you one of these days. They said hi and they missed you. And I explained the whole West Coast aversion thing. And they somewhat seem to understand, actually. So.
I just don't understand people on the West Coast is really what it is. I even in casual conversation, there's this weird culture clash. Do you know what I mean? I often wonder what West Coast people think of us East Coast guys like.
Well, I suppose we don't really have. When I think of somebody on the East Coast, I might think maybe they're a little curt. Perhaps they tend to be more blunt with their language.
Is that what you think?
Potentially, that's a possibility. And if they're a driver, I would maybe classify them as more of an aggressive style driver.
Yes. I've been told that I can be very direct and very binary by people on the West Coast.
Yeah. And so where I think people on the West Coast, maybe their conversations often tend to be more, they talk about things that are less offensive or less grabbing. You could say more small talk, but at the same time, it creates sort of a nice, friendly neighborhood atmosphere.
I have to say the West Coast, and particularly the startup space, has this weird dialect of English that's like...
Yeah.
Like, for instance, I did not know till relatively recently that just wanted to sync up with you was actually a bad thing. Because I use let's sync up like, hey, let's just jump on a call. Right, like a very casual thing. Apparently there is a negative connotation to that.
As in, like, we've fallen out of sync.
Right, exactly. I did not get that.
I don't know if I think that's a universal thing, because I could say, hey, could we sync up real quick? And that could just mean let's just exchange information. I could see how it means also, well, our communication is broken down, and it's a euphemism for saying let's get our communication back on the right track. I could see that.
I'm not to the point where I've had problems communicating, especially with folks from California. Like, one of the and there's a lot spat about the East Coast, right? But one of the nice things about the East Coast in particular is no one's shy about talking about money.
Oh.
Right? Particularly in a business context.
Yeah, that's, you know, in the West, yeah, that is a super awkward thing. To the point when I first started working, I had no idea how to bring that question up to my clients, and it was the most difficult thing.
Yeah, and this is like, especially like the whole, hey, this invoice is 30 days late conversation is much easier on the East Coast, because I think people on the East Coast expect the, you didn't pay me, so I'm not doing anything position pretty much immediately. Where folks on the West Coast are like, oh, but we've had a process and accounting and blah, blah, blah. And
yeah, that is absolutely, you've absolutely nailed it. That is a thing, and it is extremely hard to navigate, especially when you don't have the full business vocabulary on how to address these things, and you don't even really fully understand your value, and so you don't understand and they'll take advantage of you.
Well, I don't even think it's taking advantage. Like,
I think some of the people, I think some of the older, you know, like really small businesses I worked for, where there's like a guy who's worked there for 40 years and he's got a gal in the front, and they, you know, it's a really small operation. I think, yeah, those guys did take advantage of me.
Interesting. I've always seen it as kind of like, and this is probably not a feature, not a bug, right? Where, you know, the West Coast, particularly the startup scene, has learned to kind of get their business processes down to a science, to the point where, you know, they avoid accounting problems, things like that, to where they have silly rules like, oh, if we didn't get it by 2:00, we can't pay it.
Right, yes.
Where on the East Coast, no problem. So until it gets paid, we're just not going to do anything.
Yeah, that's definitely, there's systems and processes that we implement so that way we don't have to talk about it, you just follow the process.
Exactly. And if you break the process, it's like, well, you broke the process, right? Like, you've done this horrible thing. Now, this is not a real world situation at all.
I feel like I've had this happen to me a lot.
Well, I've had to do it several times, but again, years ago. But on the East Coast, it always works so much better. Of like, no problem. Till I see cash in hand, I'm not doing anything. Thanks, bye.
So one of the things is like, you literally, I don't know if this is common for you, but like, Angela was very handy because she had past experience as an actual collections agent. So she served that role as the person doing the invoicing. Also, she played a role as collections, because eventually I needed to have somebody who could talk about money very bluntly. And I can't do it. I am too West Coast that way. It is a deficiency of mine. I've gotten better as I've gotten older and more passionate about my business. But back then, like, I didn't fully know like what I should say to my clients, and after all, they're my clients, right? And so I needed to have someone that could play a heavy. And that's a pretty common thing on the West Coast, is your billing person has to play the heavy. I don't know if that's super common on the East Coast or not, because a lot, the way it's set up here is nobody talks money. Angela will talk money, you know, but I actually, even here in JB, I don't really talk money at all. I don't really want to be involved with it. It's a weird thing that is sort of sort of passed on to each person over here. Like, it is very awful. You really nailed me.
It's funny because when I first started like freelancing on my own, I was a super softie, and I had all kinds of problems, like paying rent, right? Like, because people paid whenever the hell they thought they were going to pay.
Yeah.
And then, you know, I definitely evolved into being more of a heavy, but I've come down to this like Dominic universal theory of accounts receivable. Would you like to hear it?
Oh, God, yes. Oh, this sounds great.
A client who cannot pay you on time, and this is particularly true of kickoff invoices, right? So any client who, even 3 or 4 days delay from when they say it is at the kickoff, and if the delay is an accounting process or something like that, is going to be a problem, period. And I have like honed this theory to, there is a direct linear correlation between, let's call it promptness of payments and, quote, perceived value in the work.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And then, so do you get like in the back of your mind, you're like,
get it out of here.
I gotta stop working, or do you? Well, no, this is just a maintenance client.
I just put kill clauses in all my contracts. So if an invoice is like, I think it's like 14 or 20 days past due, I have the right to just write an email and say I'm abandoning the project.
That's really smart. And, you know,
it's financially, it's an insane business move, right? But it turns out that that the correlation is so strong.
Oh yeah, yeah, and it's not. I wouldn't argue just at what they value the work. I would say it's often indicative of how smooth the business works overall.
Exactly.
And and how they own up to their commitments, which is also going to influence all of their other relationships, which will come into play over time the longer you work with them.
Well, the other one, of course, is how thoroughly they looked at the proposal you sent them with the spec of work to be done, and what was, and more importantly, wasn't going to be in it.
Yeah.
Because I cannot tell you how many times I've had people not read contracts.
Oh, of course, yeah. Especially if they're not taking you seriously or they don't take the work seriously. It depends on who you're working with. This is like a
side project for them or something crazy like that. And then they feel like, well, I know that's what it says, but I don't think that was the spirit of what we discussed.
Yeah, and it really is one of those things that until you've experienced it, you kind of are super reluctant to really be hard-nosed here because you feel like you're so thankful to have work that
I don't know. I don't feel it. I mean, I the first couple times
I sure did early on. I mean, that was
I felt it the first few times, and then I got really cheated. And, it ended up being one of those situations where the person kept doing, this is a long time ago, it was just me freelancing, all these little individual change orders. Yeah, we'll pay for it. 6 months go by, and they, I did hundreds of hours of work for these, quote, change orders, but they had changed the spec, so the spec didn't match the contract we had. So what do? They wanted to settle on their own terms.
Oh, of course, because now it's no longer relevant. That contract.
Right. And now they're like, well, we have this contract, and you didn't do the job that was supposed to be paid.
Oh, of course.
So really, we shouldn't pay you at all, right?
My personal favorite was the justification that I told myself early on. I only did this a few times, but what it was I told myself, even building up a client base for references and experience is worth a lot of money, so it's okay.
It is not. I've had clients who I've done work for where the work was highly successful, and because of a personal falling out, I can't use them as a reference because they freaking hate me.
Yeah.
And the personal falling out is always, guys, you didn't pay me in 4 months.
Right. Yeah.
And now you're mad I won't your emergency app store update. And this is, I just want to throw this out here. This is one reason why the dev consulting is not exactly the best business to be in because it's very subjective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Consulting is a hard gig to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, Adam from Vancouver's got it. Under promises, over delivers garbage, right? Because it's just not true. Now, if you're doing a product, maybe you can do that. Because the worst case is someone tries to get a refund for a unit of a product.
Yeah.
But consulting, you have this other person on the other side of the table who almost invariably does not, there's no amount of documentation, there's no amount of discovery you can do where you're going to 100% understand each other. So there's going to be this kind of gap. Now, usually you put a margin in there to cover the gap, but sometimes, I in fact, I had to have a call very recently with someone. I was doing something for them, and they literally want to change the product, to a totally different space, totally different.
Now, how do you communicate to them that, hey, this is a total restart? How do you communicate that to them? And how do you do that if they're already, several iterations into something where they've spent money? That's a very difficult conversation.
Yeah, it's a difficult conversation. I mean, luckily, the person in this case was reasonable, but I cannot stress hard enough, the nature of the consulting business is one of you're constantly trying to figure out what's in somebody's head. One, that's impossible. Two, even if you were somehow psychic for a day, that's a moving target, right? I mean, it really is. And a bad habit, too, is sometimes people believe their own marketing. Your thing is not the next Facebook. I hate to tell you. There is no next Facebook, right? Facebook will buy them or sue them into bankruptcy if that ever happened. Really, that's how the system works. No apps are going to make any significant amount of money for the foreseeable future.
So I have a dirty story to tell.
Yeah. Is this the one with that African American guy from last week?
No, that's for our other podcast that we're releasing in secret. I worked for a client that I don't know where my head was at, but I know that from the day I took the job, to the day that they had to let me go because they were shutting down, I knew it was never, ever, ever, ever going to work. And it was going to be an MMO that they...
Oh, God, I'm already scared.
Yeah,
okay.
They thought would compete with World of Warcraft. And
because spells, right?
And here's why. Because it was going to use the Facebook Games platform. You know, this was back when games were spamming Facebook feeds and making tons of money. So this was like everybody jumping on.
Crazy Mark Pincus Zynga days. Mark Pincus Tour 1 Zynga days.
Yep.
Okay.
It was during that. And so this group got together and they needed, developers, and they needed game designers, and they needed PR people, they needed server admins. So I was the lead of the server guys. And it was just me because there was no other server guys at the time. And there didn't need to be. But the idea was that once they went huge, I was going to be the lead of the server guys.
Oh, of course.
And I just, I attended all of the meetings, and I had a really hard time engaging with the work because I knew it was so doomed to failure. And I don't know what I could have done differently in retrospect other than not take the job. But it was such a great opportunity because...
There was money.
It was all remote. It was good money. It was remote work. It was all 100% remote, which was fantastic. That's nice. So it was like, well, maybe they'll have a shot, so I'll give them the best infrastructure possible. But I knew that was never going to even materialize. So
it's hard though, right? Because at some point, not 90%, 99 probably % of crazy startup ideas are crazy and stupid, right? But occasionally one's not.
I guess I look back at it and go, should I have been presumptuous enough to tell them what I think they could have done differently? Like, hey, don't base it on Flash, don't base it on the Facebook Games platform. Rethink your entire frickin' idea. Do you think I couldn't be that guy, right? Because then I'm just a Linux kid who's speaking up and mouthing off about something, and I didn't have traction or credibility, so I couldn't. That didn't feel realistic at the time. But looking back on it now, I kind of feel guilty.
Well, I don't think you should feel guilty. I mean, you're hired to build a system, right? Now, having said that, I have also implemented a few rules. Like anyone who says they're going to be the next Facebook, I generally avoid wording.
Yeah, that's a limited contract at best.
Uber for Y tends to be, or Uber for X tends to be a red flag. Anything where it's TechCrunch darling for insert noun tends to be not good. So this episode of Grumpy Old Men is brought to you by...
Yeah, boy. You know what? No, we're sharing war stories that people can learn from. And you know what else you can learn from? Our sponsor, DigitalOcean. They have great documentation for their service and for things you can do on it. It's really a great platform for you to spin up your own system on their cloud infrastructure. Use the promo code CODERDIGITAL and get a $10 credit. They are built on top of Linux. They use KVM. They have SSDs throughout their infrastructure. Their data centers are connected with crazy fast, 40 gigabit E connections. They have data centers in New York, San Francisco, Singapore, Amsterdam, London, Toronto. They got them in Germany. And what I love about DigitalOcean is the pricing structure is such that you could honestly start, really today, you could start in a Docker container on your laptop, build something there, and decide you'd like to have somebody else look at it, or you'd like to actually try it on a production system, or even put it into testing. Within 55 seconds, you could spin up a server for only $5 a month. 512 megabytes of RAM, a 20 gigabyte SSD, one CPU, and a terabyte of transfer. And with one click, you could deploy Ubuntu LTS, the latest installation of Docker, and you're done. I mean, it really, in a couple of minutes, you can go from developing on your laptop to having it up on a server with crazy fast connection and a fantastic interface to manage it, take snapshots, transfer it. It is a really, really slick system and interface. You should check it out just for their interface alone. And then on top of that, they have a great API, really straightforward. Lots of good code already written to take advantage of that API. So use our promo code CODERDIGITAL and support this show and get a $10 credit. So go to DigitalOcean.com and try them out. They have a great interface, great systems, tons of distros, and free BSD to choose from. I love me some DigitalOcean. I've got Minecraft and OwnCloud and BitTorrent Sync and SyncThing and Quazzle Core and NB and oftentimes an RTMP server or when on occasion an IceCast server, depending on what we're working on when we're out in the field. I've also been experimenting with like TrackCar and things like that too. So there's so many great things you can do, and for $5 a month. And by the way, if you only use it for a couple of hours, you're not paying $5. And that's something really to consider too. With that promo code Coder Digital, you get the $10 credit. Look at the way they do their pricing. You could just experiment with a few things for quite a while. You can break down their pricing in hourly, and a $10 credit would get you a long ways just to try out a few different things and experiment with a few different projects. That's it. I can't even imagine if I had that even 5 years ago. Even 5 years ago when I was building JB websites and infrastructure, or 5 years before that when I was building websites and infrastructure for clients, it's sort of been such a game changer for me. DigitalOcean.com, use the promo code CoderDigital, and a big thank you to DigitalOcean for sponsoring the Coder Radio program. Go check them out. They've also got fantastic documentation, great tutorials, and a lot of code written you can poke at. DigitalOcean.com, promo code CoderDigital. So I don't know what to make of this story, Mike, so I wanted to run it past you so maybe you could explain your
Chris,
thoughts.
I was actually going to propose something even crazier.
Oh, lay it on me. Lay it on me.
Let's toss your doc.
Okay. It's out.
Because
get it, you know what, as a you.
Get the hell out of here.
Get out of here.
Get it out of here.
Okay,
Peace.
It's gone.
Peace.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, really, I can't bring myself to talk about Apple today.
Okay, that's good. You know, because the whole theme. What about that Microsoft story though? Come on, that's right, current.
But in a minute, let's get to some meat here. Let's get to some.
I love it. Let's do it.
You know, you got me riled up. You really, you know, that East Coast flair is coming out, which means I'm going to
stroke
say,
it
hey,
a little bit.
That's different. You were in consulting in, let's say, what years would you say?
Oh man! Oh wow! I would have to
Were
go
you
backwards.
still in it? Let me ask you this time period. Mid to early 2000s ish.
Oh yeah. I would say 2005 is when I got into contracting and consulting. I think it's around there. So
Okay.
and I was in as a sys, you know, just like a full-time, 60-hour a week sysadmin between like the end of 99 and 2005.
Okay. So, yeah, I would say, it's weird because I worked part-time jobs, but I didn't, let's say 8, 9, right? Because there was this weird position between transitioning between part-time work and like what I did not realize was consulting at the time, but basically 1099 contract work, right? When did you get out?
Now that's hard. So I sort of spun down, I think over 2012 and 2013, and then maybe, I'm trying to remember when I went full-time JB. I want to say it might have been 2014, 2013, sometime in there.
Oh, wow. So it hasn't been so long.
No. And because I had like I kept one client. Right. And then when I went full-time, that's when I finally got rid of all my clients. And then even then, for like a year after, they would call me every now and then. And I would go out and I actually, no joke, just 2 weeks ago got a call from one of my old clients because they were in an emergency and wanted to pay me an emergency rate to come down. So yeah, but it's hard for me to say. It was sort of a transition between 2013 and 14.
I mean, obviously you're never going to do zero consulting. If someone calls you with the right amount of gold bullion, you'll probably show up. But let's say, when did it not be your primary revenue generator?
I would probably say 2014 would probably be safe. 2013, I'm not sure. Somewhere in there. Probably 2014. Let's just say to be safe.
Okay. I think I may be getting there. I think it's interesting because I primarily focus on the mobile and web, well, now primarily the web space, but, it was weird when mobile, web, right? It was like this weird back and forth thing. I have to say, in the relatively short time I've been doing it, let's say 7 years, whatever, it has gone from incredibly easy and, just generally like logical, right? It went from a very logical place
right
to I kind of feel like it's gone insane.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure
that.
if this is like a Republican Party / East Coast fiscal conservatives things. Like, did I leave it or did it leave me? Like, I'm really not sure. Have I just become more jaded that on the one hand, I get a lot of projects pitched to me, as people would probably guess, right? But I would say virtually none of them are viable. And the ones that are viable, particularly in mobile, things have radically changed to the point where I don't think I recognize it anymore. Like, not the technology, it's that's all. But just the business of providing mobile solutions and mobile consulting. Like we talked about 2 years ago when we did this show, I took issue with these phantom companies that existed, right? I called them something else, but they're effectively fake consultancies that are just little LLCs that they have little relationships with these other people and other companies, and they get in work and subcontract them. They've went from a minor nuisance and a minor inconvenience to, virtually dominant. To the point of, the whole model has changed, right? Like do
you think you can blame some of that on the fact that it's so easy for them to build from existing code and like frameworks and things like that they can really, for just an incredibly low price, subcontract that out?
I kind of blame it on clients, actually, because, having now run 2 consultancies where I tried to do the relatively full-time staff, and in Buccaneer we're W-2 full-time, that payroll cycle is coming every 2 weeks.
God, I know.
And, when you're just having a bunch of 1099s or a bunch of freelancers or whatever, it's really easy to say, hey, man, you get paid when I get paid. But, payroll is, and I don't know how Washington State is, you can't miss payroll in New Jersey. You just can't. Like, if you do, they close you technically. Obviously, the if you do implies and someone complains, right? So you get into positions, unless you're really well capitalized, of even though you're doing the work or you're a company that actually has all of the technical, all of the business, all of the process resources on hand, it's literally butts and seats, you are in a much weaker condition than competitors to you who are simply guys renting Regis one-day offices when they need to have a meeting, or literally sitting at their kitchen table cold calling people through HubSpot or Infusionsoft or something like that.
Yeah. Not only that, don't you also feel like it sort of locks you in a sense that you now, like you couldn't radically change on a dime and do something that produces way less revenue. If it was just you, you could make a decision to change, produce way less revenue, and still survive. But now that you have people that are dependent on you, you have to guarantee a certain amount of... So this isn't actually a problem I personally face, but I would imagine, like, if all of a sudden I wanted to pivot and do some sort of other thing completely unrelated, Washington Tree action show, I don't imagine, that would probably be very well supported by the audience or the sponsors. We would probably lose a bunch of revenue. It would not be possible. So if I wanted to go do a podcast about the trees in Washington, I would not be able to. In the same sense that if you wanted to just sort of focus on one particular client or market, for example, say one client came along and it looked like it was really going to work for like a year, but it'd only be enough revenue to just pay for yourself, and it's only enough work for yourself, it's not really an opportunity you could take on. Do you follow my reasoning?
Yeah, I do, but that's actually not the worst case scenario, right? So you're saying that you would either have to pass up opportunities or effectively lay people off, right?
Yeah, because sometimes the market changes and now you have to sort of do something else that maybe produces less revenue.
That's it right there. The market changes. So the norm has become these pseudo, don't call us a collection of freelancers. And this is, I'm just talking here, so please, I don't mean to crush anybody's spirit here, but I'm actually starting to think the traditional butts and seat small shop, and we're not talking Thoughtbot and Black Pixel because they are capitalized and they can finance themselves forever, is not exactly viable in its current form as a pure dev shop, right? Let me give you a great example.
Okay.
Clients pretty much have internalized that. Well, let me give you a better use case, right? There are a lot of ways to close contracts, to close sales effectively, right? Do you know what the best one is?
A phone call or an in-person lunch meeting?
Simply know the person who handles vetting the contract.
Oh, yeah. Well, no kidding. Yeah, that's for
That
sure.
is it. So what I'm seeing is, and I'll be totally honest, my uncle is one of my main competitors, and he's rough. Is you get a guy who has relationships, be that guy, and just effectively freeze everybody else out, and then subcontract the work to them on bad terms. Right. So what does this mean? Well, and I'm in a position where we're considering pivoting towards products or something like that, right? Something where the value is not purely transactional. And let me dissuade any illusions from any people in Kansas who think they're going to do well contracting. You are transactional. You are transactional to your client. Your client does not care about you. They care about what you're providing for that limited time that it's worth it. And I only pick on Kansas because Zane at otters.io did an excellent blog post that everybody should check out. It's otters.io. But it's true, right? And the value proposition that used to be there for a butts and seats shop is, in my opinion, and I could be wrong, and it could be a regional thing, it could be a business cycle thing, but I think it's quickly evaluating, because the most important element is the business relationships for the sales. And for the people who are going to listen to this, who are going to be technical founders, that is going to be something you're missing.
So in other words, if you have a fancy presentation and somebody that the client can speak to and feel like is managing them, the back end actual work being done is not the selling or important aspect. So the back end work could be is being handed off to people that might not even be in the same country. Maybe the quality is horrible, but as long as that interface to the client is good, and maybe even a friend or has an in, that's all it really takes.
I would be as bold to say I've been very focused on like processes and code quality on the dev side for a while now. I would say that is 100% the wrong area to focus on.
That makes a lot of sense, unfortunately.
Because it doesn't matter what the actual amount of work you got done is if the value is not perceived. And conversely, if you did nothing and the person thinks you did a lot, or they trust you from their old frat or whatever it is, right? You're fine. Now, eventually, of course, you can't, I'm not saying a bunch of frat guys or, let's call them finance guys who, former mortgage sellers, right? Let's say that can open pseudo dev shops and just scam people out of money. No, obviously you have to produce, but no one cares how epic your dev process is. No one cares what toolchain you're using for the most part.
Or how clean nobody really cares how clean your code is unless you're delivering them open source code or something. I mean, when you're delivering a binary or you're delivering, an app in a store, they don't really ever know. And
they don't know. Right. It doesn't matter. What cares are cost. When can you get it done? No, can you give me a fixed bid, fixed time, but I need to be able to do revisions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It matters more maybe in web development.
I would say it's actually worse than web development, because in web development, you have all of these pre-packaged solutions. Like
that is true. That is,
and one that are going to, where in mobile, you really don't have that yet, right? You have some cannibalization from, there's all these there's like Ionic, there's Cordova, there's, Xamarin. There's an embarrassment of choices that it's not reasonable for you to do.
Does it, in the big picture, when you say you blame it on clients, is it because it really comes down to the clients not having taste and not having the correct understanding when they go into a project of what the actual things of value are that they should be seeking? And of course, why would they? How could they? But that is what the problem is, isn't it? That they don't know?
I think what happened is that maybe that's an overstatement. I think everybody's a little guilty, right? The folks like me who were kind of annoyed with the fake consultancies, but you know what? They tend to pay, right?
Well, and couldn't you also if I'm playing devil's advocate, I would criticize you for perhaps missing the mark on the client's expectations, because one could say you should have the insight that they don't really care what process you followed or or how clean the code is. That's sort of an insight maybe you should have had.
And I think that's true. The problem, though, right, is the old triangle. You have quality, time, and price.
And you want to be a boutique shop that is valuable. There's a reason, right? No,
that's not it. There is a quantifiable change that happened, and I would say it happened in 2014. Time and price became fixed, right? So the only thing that could suffer was quality, and price went down, right? I mean, you can actually just look this up. There's a big trend towards insourcing, towards hiring people directly. So that doesn't help if you're in the boutique shop position. There's also consolidation between little shops, either getting forced out or simply, absorbed by the big guys. It's almost a situation of, how do I want to put this? The way you should think about it is filters, right? So instead of, let's just make up the name of a big company, Godzilla Development, right?
Love
or
it.
Godzilla Studios.
Okay.
Where before I might have been competing with a smaller version of them directly, the reality is now they're the client. They're my client because, I just can't get into the RFP. And this is not just me. I've been talking to a lot of other people who own shops. And, the percentages of people's businesses who are effectively subcontracting from competitors, meaning they're taking work from people who are formerly their competitors on, let's call them, difficult terms, right? Kind of the I'll pay you when I pay you sort of thing. Nice. Oh, and if things don't work out, I'm going to lay it on you. I had one guy tell me his whole consultancy is now just serving his old competitors because he just could not get in, which is something I have been spending a ton of effort trying to resist. And almost universally failing, by the way. like you just can't, you just can't compete if your overhead is all dev and all kind of technical people. You can't afford the salesman who, if he's any good, he's going to want a commission and a base and healthcare, right?
It also means every person on your team really has to be essential and really has to really bring something, because they are, it is such a critical balance that you have to be able to walk there. So where do you take this now?
Well, I don't have a silver bullet, right? And the reality too is, talking to other people in agencies, a lot of people have, I'm kind of Don Quixote here, tilting at windmills. I'm trying to avoid I'm just going to, be one guy in an office, do sales and subcontract to other people.
Oh, it's horrible though.
Many of my peers have literally decided to do that, right? They keep one or two guys, they keep a project manager, they keep some salespeople, and they've, told other devs, you can be freelancers or you can leave. I don't, on the one hand, this is the free market, and the free market is basically saying that the value is in the end result as far as the client is concerned, not in how they got there, right? And by the way, you do this all the time. Your phone is not made by Apple. Really, it's designed by Apple. Mm-hmm. Samsung and Sony make most of it, and then they stamp an Apple logo on the back.
And they send it over to what's their faces to.
The Gorilla Glass guys to do the coding.
Well,
right?
And you've got. I was trying to remember the name of the factory. Foxconn.
Oh, Foxconn. Mm-hmm. Right, and then this is kind of the model that Dev Consulting has taken, where, I'm not going to name names, but let's just call it Godzilla Co. Right, they'll take on a huge project. The only employees working on that project are a sales guy and a project manager. Everybody else is a freelancer.
Yep. What this reminds me of is my consulting. Towards the end of my consulting, there was the two trends I really noticed was a lot of on-premises servers were going to hosted. Like Exchange was a big one, and then it was starting to become Active Directory and a bunch of other things. So that was a really interesting trend because it meant less work for me. Although I got work helping make some of the migrations. Moving an entire company to hosted Exchange was quite the process.
Oh, that must have been
you had to touch every machine that had Outlook. So the other thing that I really noticed was companies like Staples and
Oh yeah.
other large companies were buying up our competitors. So for a long period of time, I worked as a contractor, but I was an employee. But they sent me out to all their clients, and I had a whole bunch of clients. And so they were of a size where they were for a while a little too small. But then all of a sudden, as we grew, they started showing up on some of these bigger companies' radars, and so we got to see essentially what was happening is they would come and court these. Every town, Mike, had a computer guy. Every town here in Washington had a computer guy, and some of them got to be some bigger operations, and some of them were really. We had one, I can't remember. It was like Moose something. Moose. They were actually one of my favorite. They were very large. They sold a ton of compact hardware back before HP bought them, and they got in with Citrix, and they were a huge consulting company as far as like I was concerned, and they got bought out. And there was a lot of this consolidation happening, and in a lot of cases, the owners were either just leaving or they were eventually starting their own companies over again, just like they're on their own. But in a lot of cases, they would start marketing extremely, extremely heavy in those areas with rates that were completely unreasonable, because what they'd say is fixed cost. We'll come in, we'll manage all of your systems for a flat fixed fee per month. And then when there was something and they would try everything they could before they do on-site. Of course, they had remote access to everything. In fact, in one case, they even managed all of you didn't contact Microsoft to get a license. You went through them. They managed the firewall licensing, everything, the antivirus license. They were in so deep, but they would never send anybody on site unless they had to. And when they had to, they would subcontract that out to the lowest bidder. So some of these guys that used to be the owners of the companies that got bought out that now have their one-man shops, every now and then they get a gig, but of course they're burned out and they don't like the company, so they do a really half-assed job. And they were just killing us at the rate. So maybe our rate might have been $125 an hour, right? And they'd come in at $95 or $75 an hour when they had to send somebody on site. And you would get up to a certain amount of hours prepaid. So if you bought the monthly fixed rate to manage your whole network, that might also include 60 hours of on-site or something like that, which they would just throw in. How do you compete with that? Because when you come and say, well, yeah, every time we come on site, we charge. Well, these guys will come on site for 60 hours for free for a flat fixed rate. How do you compete with that? And you just couldn't. And so that was the other trend. So then when I went on to my own gig, I basically had people that knew me and kept those clients for a while, and they weren't really at risk of getting rolled into something like that.
Well, I mean, devil's advocate, right? This is the market cycle maybe, and maybe development and technical work is simply now a commodity like everything else. Right? So if you want to maintain the type of traditional, let's say, shop mentality, right, with butts and seats, maybe you now have to somehow, quote, move up the value chain. I don't know what that means, which is literally something I'm trying to figure out. But, I'm thinking about all the other types of, shops, like woodworking shops, plumbing shops. A lot of these plumbers, their main client is AJ Perry now, right? The huge national plumbing company that just subcontracts. This isn't unique to our industry, I think, Chris. I mean, tell me what you think.
No, I think that's exactly what it is, unfortunately, which means that it's probably a lock. It's probably going to happen regardless.
Well, I think it's a lock, yeah. Think about this. If you're Godzilla Co., what do? I'll send you the work. Oh, but if you ever post that you did this project or that they were really, something you worked on, we'll sue the crap out of you. So they can continue using that to sell. And you don't realize it, but it's not a partnership, because the day either there's a mishap or they can get a better rate somewhere else, that's what they're going to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's sort of it's sort of like having to continually hop to the next thing. And you want to try to avoid that. You want to be able to settle down and just get into something. But maybe that's sort of the problem, is that's not really an option in this field anymore. You can't really... Right. That time has come and gone. Perhaps, unless you don't do the work for hire kind of thing. I mean,
what a radical concept.
Yeah, you could try something else, but yeah.
And I think that's where we should leave it.
Well, why don't before I don't know if you saw this, but you have inspired a couple of people, so I want to read those really quick. But first, I'll mention Linux Academy. And also, if anybody has any thoughts on what Mike's talked about, coderradio.reddit.com. Adam from Vancouver, he was here. He's often here, right? And he joined us over at jblive.tv. You guys should join us too on Mondays. Go to jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar. So I want to talk really quickly about something that Linux Academy's been working on. They just released a whole slew of updates. So if you're not familiar with Linux Academy, go visit them. Go over to linuxacademy.com/coders to support the show and get yourself a discount. So they've been working on a whole bunch of stuff. They have a whole learning platform for technology based around Linux and open source. And they've launched new courses that are really, really fantastic. Because one thing I definitely noticed at scale is a lot of people, and I noticed this at OSCON too, are talking about Ansible. A lot of people are talking about Ansible. So they've got a new courseware on Ansible and AWS. They have an advanced AWS security course now. They have the EC2 container service and using that as a new courseware. Docker and Elastic Beanstalk. They have some new live labs, which are really awesome. And something that I think is definitely worth checking out. They're trying something new. Cloud Cadet, and they got their first episode out. Check it out. And they also have released an iOS app. And they're working on their Android app too. So Linux Academy, they just announced some of the stuff in their live show. This is one of the small perks of having a membership like this, is that reoccurring revenue for them means that they can invest in development and invest in hiring staff, and they've just done that. Their team has been blowing up, and they have people dedicated now to work on quality of content. They got people dedicated to work on brand new content, and they have people dedicated on going back and making sure that content stays relevant. So they're investing in multiple areas right now, full-time people doing this work. And it makes Linux Academy a step above everybody else, because not only do they have 2,205 video courses, self-paced courses you can take, they have scenario labs, they have really a slick system that you just choose the Linux distro. They have 7+ distros to choose from, and then they spin up the server. It matches that distro, and the courseware automatically adjusts. They have an availability planner where you can set how much time you have available, and they have instructor help when you need it. linuxacademy.com/coders. Go check them out and check out some of the new features and check out the community. Lots of JB members in there. linuxacademy.com/coders. And a big thank you to Linux Academy for sponsoring the Coder Radio program. Okay, so we'll just do a couple of emails and then we'll go because we had a whole bunch of stuff. But I actually one I wanted to kind of follow up with you on. So the first one, though, comes in from Wesley. He says he wanted to know if there was any interest in revamping the mobile community app. He says, I'd love to help contribute, but not sure how others feel about starting one again. There is an Android app. I'm not sure how current it is. But he says maybe we could start a JB community app, but not focus on streaming video or audio, which other apps probably already handle. But instead, we could build some other kind of JB app, such as where users could send questions during shows, get in the chat room, etc. Or maybe just stock simple or something like the calendar. Just curious. And he was considering using Ionic. In fact, a couple of people wrote in saying they're considering using Ionic. So we do have a developer community. What you should really do if you want to get involved, because yes, I would really, anytime anybody wants to help, I would really appreciate it. If you want to get involved, probably the best resource would either be the chat room or go to jupitercolony.com and look at some of the resources there. jupitercolony.com, and we have some things linked there. Okay, and our last email, this came from the Hawk of Truth, so I wanted to get to this one. He says, hi, Chris and Mike, here's the thing. The iPad Pro needs a native file system to support professional work. Here's an example. During our home inspection, I inquired why so many inspectors were using Surface Pros. Resounding response was, apps can't anticipate all of my workflows and tasks and how they relate. Which is pretty much very true. So I'm wondering, Mike, I know you were experimenting with the iPad Pro. Any follow-up on that sucker?
Yeah, it definitely needs some better API support, but I have some hope for it. The price point needs to come down too for people to actually buy it.
I really think that answer is really insightful. That the apps really can't anticipate what you might need to share or what information you might need to share in between applications. They just simply can't, because every workflow is a little different. Everybody has their edge case, and at the end of the day, I love saying that, when you write to the file system and other apps can read the file system, it lets you be the go-between. It lets you be the transition layer. So I really agree. So there you go. Thank you, Hawk of Truth. All right. So if you'd like to contact the Coder Radio program, here's how you do. You go to jupiterbroadcasting.com/contact, choose Coder Radio from the drop-down, or you can go to coderradio.reddit.com. Also a great place to submit stories. We'd love it when you do that. Do more of that. And feedback. We'll have a thread for 190 in there. Go check out Mike. He's online. Did you know that? Buccaneer Tech. He's over there. Dominic on the on the Twitters. We got links to stuff. Anything else you want to plug, Mr. Dominic? No, nope. He's gone. He's out. He's going to go.
I'm gone.
He's gone.
I'm flying to California.
Yeah, right. I bet. All right, well, thank you for tuning this week's episode of Coder Radio. We would like to have you join us live, jblive.tv, Monday, noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. You can hang out in our chat room and help name the show. It's always a good time. All right. Thanks so much for tuning this week's episode of Coder Radio. See you right back here next week.